The Grand Lyceum of Xylos was, by all accounts, the most prestigious institution of higher learning in the quadrant. Its lecture halls were not mere rooms, but soaring amphitheaters of polished obsidian and woven light, filled with beings from 1,000 different worlds. They were a cosmic menagerie of intellect and ambition. There were the Corbaxians, hulking insectoids whose chitinous plates were etched with the sigils of their warrior-scholar clans, their multiple arms folded in expressions of severe contemplation. Floating in translucent gel tanks were the Laminians, beings of pure, coherent thought who communicated in shimmering, complex pulses of color that only specialized translators could decipher. And then there was Professor Kthar, a Xylan, whose crystalline body refracted the hall's light into 1,000 tiny rainbows, his voice a series of perfectly modulated chimes that spoke of an arrogance forged over millennia of undisputed intellectual superiority. Today's lecture was a particular favorite among the student body. Xenobiology 704, Evolutionary Pinnacles and Predatory Dynamics. It was the kind of lecture that appealed to the primal instincts that lurked beneath even the most civilized minds. It was a celebration of strength, of hyperspecialization, of the galaxy's most perfectly honed killing machines. And, as was often the case in such discussions, it began with a comfortable, universally accepted baseline for weakness. It began with humanity. Observe, Professor Kthar chimed, his crystalline facets shimmering as a massive holographic display materialized above the lecture pit. It showed a bipedal creature, soft-skinned and graceless. It was a human, the specimen designated humanity from the Sol system. A Class 7 death world, admittedly, but one whose primary evolutionary pressures seemed to have resulted in a creature of profound biological mediocrity. A low rumble of amusement, a series of clicks and whistles that constituted laughter in this diverse crowd, echoed through the hall. On the screen, the human was shown stumbling on uneven ground, then applying a brightly colored adhesive bandage to a minor scrape. It was footage curated for maximum comedic effect. No natural armor, Kthar continued, his tone dripping with the condescending pity of a being who was, himself, essentially a sentient diamond. No integrated weaponry. Its claws are flat, brittle plates of keratin, useless for rending flesh. Its teeth are blunt, designed for grinding vegetation and cooked proteins. Its sensory organs are laughably narrowband. They cannot perceive gravitational waves, taste pheromonal signatures, or see in the ultraviolet spectrum. They are, in essence, fragile bags of chemically reactive water, held upright by a primitive calcium scaffolding. In the upper tiers of the amphitheater, Vrex of the third Corbaxian claw flexed his 4 pincer-like hands. Each was tipped with a razor-sharp talon capable of shearing through starship plating. He looked at his own magnificent, weaponized anatomy, then back at the pathetic creature on the screen. He let out a chittering sound of contempt. Humans were a joke. A soft, squishy, slow-moving joke. Their only galactic contribution was their bizarrely complex social dynamics and their bafflingly popular, if nutritionally vapid, beverage known as coffee. They were diplomats and traders, not because they were skilled, but because they would fold in any real physical confrontation. It was the only niche available to them. Their survival strategy, Kthar elaborated, gesturing with a pointed crystalline limb, is one of persistence and tool use. But this is a primitive strategy. The burrowing Grelnok uses tools. The tree-dwelling flittermite persists. These are not markers of an advanced species, but of a species that failed to evolve correctly. They are a biological dead end, propped up by a fleeting and easily dismantled technological base. They are prey that has forgotten its place. The Laminians in their tanks pulsed a serene, patronizing blue, the color of agreement. The Corbaxians clacked their mandibles. The entire hall, a collection of the galaxy's brightest and most powerful science, was united in this single, comfortable truth. Humans were weak. They were the bottom of the food chain, the control group against which true strength was measured. And in the very back row, slumped in a seat designed for a being 3 times his size, a human named Jake stifled a yawn. Jake Peterson was, officially, an exchange student in the Xenobiology program. Unofficially, he was a field agent for the Terran Diplomatic Corps, tasked with assessing the prevailing galactic attitudes towards humanity. And so far, his assessment was that everyone thought his species was about as threatening as a damp towel. He wore a loose-fitting gray garment called a hoodie and had scuffed, soft-soled shoes on his feet. He was doodling on his datapad, sketching a surprisingly detailed picture of a creature that looked suspiciously like a squirrel wearing a tiny helmet. Rex, seated next to him, noticed the yawn. The Corbaxian leaned over, his massive, multifaceted eyes focusing on the small, soft mammal beside him. The air displaced by his sheer bulk was a physical pressure. Is the professor's lecture too stimulating for your primitive mammalian consciousness, human Jake? Rex's translator rendered his clicking speech into a deep, gravelly baritone laced with unconcealed mockery. Jake didn't even look up from his drawing. Nah, he said, his voice casual, almost lazy. It's just that the theoretical stuff is a little dry. Reminds me of kindergarten, honestly. Rex paused. His forearms froze in mid-gesture. The word kindergarten was processed by his translator, but the cultural context was completely absent. It offered a literal translation. Child garden, a place where you planted your young? A bizarre agricultural ritual? He accessed the Galactic Encyclopedia. The definition it provided only deepened his confusion. A preliminary educational institution for Terran offspring, focused on rudimentary social interaction, basic symbolic recognition, and structured play. Structured play? Rudimentary social interaction? How could a lecture on the galaxy's most lethal predators possibly remind him of that? Vrex decided it was just another example of human cognitive dissonance, their brains clearly unable to process information in a logical sequence. Your mind flits from topic to topic like a scared flitter might, Vrex scoffed, turning his attention back to the lecture. It is a sign of an unfocused, prey-like intellect. Jake just smiled faintly and added a tiny acorn to his squirrel drawing. He wasn't offended. It was hard to be offended by someone who was so profoundly, confidently, and completely wrong. It was like getting angry at a toddler for not understanding quantum mechanics. You just patted them on the head and made sure they didn't stick a fork in a power socket. Down in the lecture pit, Professor Kthar was moving on to the main event. And now, to illustrate the pinnacle of natural predatory evolution, I present a live specimen. Acquired at great expense and risk from the toxic mists of Cygnus X1's Shadow Nebula. I give you the Gloomfang. A section of the obsidian floor slid away, and a stasis cube rose from below. The air in the hall grew cold. A palpable wave of unease washed over the assembled students. Even Vrex, a warrior scholar from a species of warriors, felt a primal thrill of fear. Inside the shimmering blue energy field of the cube was a creature of nightmare. The Gloomfang was a sinuous, multi-limbed horror, its skin the color of a fresh bruise. It had no eyes, navigating its world through a combination of echolocation and, more terrifyingly, by sensing the bioelectric fields of its prey. Its long, slender limbs ended in claws that dripped a neurotoxic venom, and its primary weapon was not physical. The Gloomfang was a psychic predator. It projected an aura of pure, unadulterated terror, an evolutionary adaptation that paralyzed its victims long before its claws ever touched them. It was a creature that had evolved on a low-gravity world with scarce resources, a world where missing a single meal meant death. As such, it was brutally efficient. It was the apex predator against which all others were judged. The Gloomfang's psychic assault, Kthar explained, his chiming voice taking on a reverent tone, is not a mere intimidation display. It is a direct neurological attack. It bypasses conscious thought and targets the most primitive fear centers of the brain. It induces total systemic paralysis. To face a Gloomfang is to experience the very concept of terror made manifest. No species, not even the Corbaxian warrior caste, can resist its effects for more than a few seconds. Vrex shifted uncomfortably. The professor was correct. He could feel the creature's psychic pressure even through the stasis field, a cold, oily dread seeping into the corners of his mind. He gripped the ceremonial energy blade sheathed at his side, a subconscious gesture of reassurance. It was then that the lights in the Grand Lyceum flickered. A low, groaning sound echoed through the hall as a secondary power system kicked in. The flicker lasted for no more than a second. But in that 1 second, the stasis field containing the galaxy's most perfect predator winked out of existence. The silence that followed was absolute. For a moment, nothing happened. The Gloomfang remained coiled in its now-deactivated cage, its eyeless head slowly lifting, tasting the air, sensing the sudden, delicious buffet of biosignatures that had filled its world. And then, with a speed that defied its size, it uncoiled and leaped from the pit. Panic. Pure, unadulterated, species-agnostic panic erupted. The Laminians' tanks flashed a chaotic, terrified rainbow of colors. The Corbaxians, for all their warrior bravado, scrambled over one another, their proud sigils forgotten in a clattering, chitinous wave of fear. Professor Kthar let out a high-pitched series of chimes that sounded remarkably like a scream, his crystalline form vibrating so intensely it threatened to shatter. The lecture hall, a bastion of galactic intellect, had devolved into a cosmic garage sale of anxiety. The emergency blast shields slammed down over the exits, sealing them all inside. The Gloomfang landed silently in the center of the lowest tier of seating. It unfurled to its full height, a fluid nightmare of muscle and venom. It didn't need to attack yet. It simply existed, and it began to broadcast. The psychic wave that rolled out from it was no longer a subtle pressure. It was a physical force, a tsunami of atavistic horror. It screamed of darkness, of being eaten alive, of the cold, final certainty of death. Students collapsed. Beings with exoskeletons and redundant nervous systems crumpled to the floor, their limbs locked, their minds trapped in a prison of pure fear. Vrex managed to stay upright, a testament to his warrior training. He drew his energy blade, its humming crackle a pathetic sound against the psychic onslaught. But his limbs were heavy, his thoughts sluggish. He could feel the Gloomfang's terror seeping into his mind, dissolving his courage like acid. He was a warrior, but he was also prey, and his body knew it. But amidst the chaos, the screaming, and the psychic apocalypse, one being remained conspicuously calm. Jake Peterson, the fragile, mediocre human, sighed. It was a sigh of profound and weary annoyance. The kind of sigh one makes when the Wi-Fi goes out during a movie, or when you realize you've forgotten to buy milk. He stood up, slowly and deliberately. He stretched his arms over his head, his spine making a series of soft popping sounds. "All right," he said, to no one in particular. "Everybody just try to relax. Deep breaths. It's just a big lizard." Vrex, his mind struggling against the tide of terror, stared at the human. Was he insane? Had his primitive brain simply broken? "Relax," the Corbaxian stammered, his voice a choked gargle. "It will paralyze us and drain our bioenergy. It is an evolutionary pinnacle." Jake glanced at the cowering warrior scholar, then at the psychic horror currently reducing the best and brightest of the galaxy to quivering heaps of terror. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "Yeah, I get it. Scary stuff. Now, if you could just get everyone to move back. Behind me would be good. Give me some room to work." The sheer, unadulterated confidence in his voice was so baffling, so utterly out of place, that it momentarily cut through Vrex's fear. Behind him? Behind this soft, fleshy bag of water? It was the most absurd tactical suggestion he had ever heard. It was like hiding behind a single blade of grass during a meteor shower. And yet, the human was not afraid. Vrex looked at Jake, truly looked at him, for the first time. The human's eyes were not wide with terror. His posture was not defensive. He was loose, relaxed, and focused. He was watching the Gloomfang not as prey watches a predator, but as a groundskeeper watches a gopher that's tearing up the lawn. The Gloomfang, sensing this anomaly, this single point of calm in a sea of delicious fear, turned its eyeless head toward Jake. The creature was confused. Its psychic broadcast was its primary weapon, a tool that had never failed. It focused its entire output on the small, soft creature in the strange gray garment. A concentrated beam of pure terror, enough to stop the heart of a Corbaxian battlelord, shot across the room and slammed into Jake's mind. The effect was nothing. Absolutely nothing. Jake just blinked, his expression unchanged. It felt like a faint pressure, a mild headache, like he'd had one too many beers the night before. He'd had scarier experiences trying to assemble IKEA furniture. This, more than anything, seemed to genuinely disturb the Gloomfang. Its entire evolutionary strategy was based on a single, unwavering principle. It was the scariest thing in the room. Always. The fact that this creature was not terrified meant that either it was too stupid to understand fear, or that it was something scarier than the Gloomfang. And the Gloomfang, for the first time in its existence, felt a flicker of something other than predatory hunger. It felt a sliver of doubt. Jake took a slow step forward, then another. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't threatening. He was just walking. The Gloomfang, in response, took a hesitant step back. A low hiss escaped its fanged maw, but it lacked conviction. It sounded less like a threat and more like a complaint. "Hey there, buddy," Jake said, his voice soft and even. "You're making a real mess. Scaring my classmates. We can't have that," he continued his slow, deliberate advance. The Gloomfang kept backing away, its sinuous body coiling tighter, a clear sign of defensive posturing. The predator was becoming the prey, and it had no idea why. Then Jake did something that shattered every known law of xenobiology and tactical engagement. He crouched down slightly, made direct eye contact with the creature's eyeless face, and made a sharp, clicking sound with his tongue. "Tisk, tisk, tisk," he said, shaking his head in mild disapproval. The Gloomfang froze. That sound. It was not a language, but it conveyed a meaning that transcended species. It was the sound of disappointment, the sound of dominance. It was the sound a parent makes to a misbehaving child, the sound a master makes to an unruly pet. The Gloomfang, a creature that had never known a master, that had been the undisputed apex of its entire biosphere for eons, suddenly felt small. It felt chastised. Jake saw a discarded datapad stylus on the floor. He casually bent down and picked it up, never breaking his calm, steady gaze. He held the stylus loosely between his thumb and forefinger, not like a weapon, but like a conductor's baton. He took one more step forward. The Gloomfang broke. The psychic terror it was broadcasting sputtered and died, replaced by a palpable aura of confusion and anxiety. It lowered its head, tucked its limbs under its body, and emitted a high-pitched, pathetic whine. It was the universal sound of submission. The galaxy's most perfect predator, the evolutionary pinnacle that had paralyzed a hull full of the Quadrant's elite, had just been psychologically dominated by a soft, unarmed mammal making disapproving noises. Jake walked right up to the cowering creature. The entire hall held its collective breath, certain they were about to witness a messy, if confusing, death. He reached out his soft, fleshy hand and patted the Gloomfang on its head. The creature flinched, then leaned into the touch, whining softly. "There now," Jake murmured. "That's better, isn't it? No need to get all worked up." He then noticed the sparking, broken power conduit hanging from the deactivated stasis cube. With a practiced motion, he looped the insulated cable around the Gloomfang's neck, fashioning a makeshift leash. He gave it a gentle tug. "Come on, back in your box." The Gloomfang, utterly defeated, followed him like a lost puppy. It padded meekly behind the human, allowing itself to be led back into the stasis cube. Jake fiddled with the control panel for a moment, rerouted a secondary circuit, and with a hum, the blue containment field flickered back to life, trapping the now whimpering creature inside. Jake brushed his hands together, turned around, and faced the lecture hall. He was met with a wall of absolute, profound, and terrified silence. Every eye, every sensor, every multifaceted lens was fixed on him. Vrex stood frozen, his energy blade still humming in his hand, looking like a forgotten toy. Professor Kthar was completely still, his crystalline form a statue of pure, unadulterated shock. The psychic pressure was gone, but it had been replaced by a tension that was infinitely heavier. It was the tension of a completely shattered worldview. Finally, Professor Kthar managed to form a sound. His chiming voice was distorted, filled with static. "How?" It was not a question. It was a plea, a demand for the universe to make sense again. "How did you? What did you? It's psychic assault. It should have liquefied your neural pathways. You have no psychic shielding. You are a primitive, soft-skinned, prey species." Jake leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. He looked at the sea of terrified faces and gave a small, weary smile. This was the part he hated. The explanation. It always ruined the mystique. "Liquefied my neural pathways," Jake repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Professor, with all due respect, that thing's psychic assault was the equivalent of a house cat puffing up its fur and hissing. It was an intimidation display. A pretty good one, I'll grant you, but that's all it was. A house cat. Vrex managed to choke out, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. That is a gloomfang. Its terror field is legendary. Jake nodded. Right. And it's legendary because most species in this galaxy evolved on what my people would call easy mode planets. Stable ecosystems. Predictable predator-prey dynamics. You guys had, what, one, maybe two things at the top of your food chain? And you learned to avoid them. That makes sense, he paused, letting his words sink in. Earth, he said, his voice becoming quieter, more serious, is not like that. Earth is a Class 7 death world. You got that part right. But you misunderstand what that means. It's not just about high gravity or tectonic instability. It's about the competition. On Earth, everything is trying to kill everything else, all the time, in increasingly clever and horrifying ways. Our apex predators don't just have claws or teeth. They have intelligence. They have cunning. He started to pace, his casual demeanor returning. You think that gloomfang is scary? I've seen a 500-kilo grizzly bear bluff charge a tour bus just to see if it could get a snack. That's not for survival. That's for entertainment. I've seen footage of an orca, a marine mammal, intentionally beaching itself to hunt seals, a ridiculously high-risk maneuver that requires complex problem-solving and generational knowledge. We have snakes whose venom can dissolve your tissues from the inside out. We have spiders the size of my hand. We have insects that lay their eggs inside other living insects. We have microscopic bacteria and viruses that have been waging a constant, silent war against us for our entire evolutionary history, forcing our immune systems to become the most ruthlessly adaptive defense network in the known galaxy. The hall was silent. The Laminians pulsed a deep, troubled violet. Vrex looked down at his own 4 formidable claws and suddenly felt very, very under-equipped. That's psychic intimidation, Jake continued, gesturing dismissively at the now docile gloomfang. We call that an aggressive threat display. It's designed to trigger a prey animal's flight or fight response. But humans, we have a third option. Freeze. We learn to stand our ground. Because when you're being stalked by a persistence hunter for 3 days straight under a blistering sun, running is a death sentence. You have to turn, face it, and convince it that you are not worth the effort. That you are more dangerous than you look. He looked directly at Vrex. Every human child learns this. Don't run from a dog. Stand your ground. Make yourself look bigger. Stare it down. We teach our 5-year-olds how to manage creatures that could tear a Corbaxian warrior limb from limb. That gloomfang tried to hit me with a wall of fear, but my brain, the primitive mammalian brain you were talking about, just processed it as a very large, very loud dog barking at me. My ingrained response wasn't terror. It was annoyance. And then dominance. The clicking sound, Professor Kthar chimed, his voice faint. It's a universal constant, Professor, Jake explained patiently. Prey animals don't make sharp, confident noises. Predators do. When it saw that I wasn't scared, and I made a sound that asserted my dominance, its entire world fell apart. It had no frame of reference for a creature that wasn't terrified of it. So it defaulted to the only other possibility, that I was a bigger, scarier predator. Its brain, for all its psychic power, took the path of least resistance. Submission was safer than confrontation. And the stylus? Vrex asked, his voice barely a whisper. A hidden weapon. Jake laughed, a genuine, hearty laugh that echoed in the stunned silence. This? He held up the flimsy piece of plastic. No, this wasn't a weapon. This was a prop. It was a focus object. It's a psychological trick. By focusing on it, I was signaling my intent. I was showing the creature that I had a plan, that I was in control. It's a de-escalation technique I learned in a corporate management seminar about dealing with hostile takeovers. Turns out, it works on apex predators, too. Who knew? A corporate management seminar. The phrase hung in the air, a monument to absurdity. He had subdued the galaxy's most terrifying creature using a technique designed for boardroom arguments. Jake's expression sobered again. You see, you all look at us and you see what we lack. No armor, no claws, no venom. But you're missing the point. Our weakness is our strength. Our bodies are soft, so we had to build minds of forged steel. We have no natural weapons, so we learned to make the entire universe our weapon. That stylus, this desk, the air you breathe, A human in a corner can and will find a way to kill you with it. He gestured around the hall at the assembled aliens. You are all specialists. The Corbaxians are warriors. The Laminians are thinkers. The Xylans are analysts. Humanity, we're generalists. We had to be. On our world, you couldn't just be strong, or fast, or smart. You had to be all three, and you had to be adaptable, because the rules changed every single day. One day the threat is a flood, the next it's a plague, the day after it's a saber-toothed cat that has figured out how to open your cave door. We don't just survive on our death world, Jake said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout. We go there for vacation. We climb its highest, most treacherous mountains for fun. We swim in its oceans next to sharks for recreation. We jump out of flying vehicles with nothing but a sheet of fabric to slow us down for a thrill. We look at the most hostile, God-forsaken environments on our own planet, and we think, yeah, I could probably build a nice little cabin there. He let that final, horrifying statement hang in the air. The concept of seeking out danger for pleasure was so fundamentally alien, so deeply disturbing, that several students began to feel the phantom pressure of the Gloomfang's psychic attack returning. You see us as prey that has forgotten its place, Jake concluded, his voice now back to its normal, friendly tone. The truth is, we're the only predator in this galaxy that has learned to wear the perfect camouflage. You look at us and see a joke, and by the time you realize we're the punchline, it's already too late. Being consistently, universally, and profoundly underestimated is the single greatest tactical advantage in the history of the cosmos. With that, he looked at a clock on the wall. Well, this has been fun. Is the lecture over? I'm supposed to meet a friend from the diplomatic corps for a barbecue. We're grilling steaks. Professor Kthar, whose entire field of study had just been dismantled and incinerated before his eyes, could only manage a weak, trembling gesture of dismissal. Jake gave a cheerful wave and walked towards the now-opening blast doors, whistling a Johnny tune. The entire hall watched him go, this small, soft-skinned creature in its ridiculous gray hoodie. He didn't walk like a warrior, or a scholar, or a diplomat. He walked with the easy, unconcerned gait of something that has absolutely no predators. The gait of something that knows, with bone-deep, cellular certainty, that it is the most dangerous thing in any room it enters. For a long time after he left, the hall remained silent. Then, Vrex, the mighty warrior scholar of the Third Corbaxian Claw, slowly lowered his energy blade and deactivated it. The hum died, leaving an even deeper silence. He looked at his four powerful, chitinous hands, hands that could punch through solid rock. Then he thought of Jake's soft, five-fingered hands, hands that had tamed a nightmare with nothing more than a pat on the head. He felt a cold, unfamiliar sensation crawl up his thorax. It was a feeling of profound, existential inadequacy. He turned to his datapad, his movements stiff and robotic. He slowly typed a single query into the search field. The word he typed was not humanity, it was not death world, or psychology. He typed kindergarten. He had to know. He had to understand the child gardens that forged such terrifying, unassuming monsters.